Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yasodhanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yasodhanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yasodhanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yasodhanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari.
Jayam Vishnupad Paramhamsa Pravikacharya Ashtodarsha Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Śrīla Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramhamsa Pravikacharya Ashtodarsha Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Śrīla Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopana Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Pramanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 17, Text 7. Jatadaras Tivratapa Brahmavadi Sabbapatihi Ankirkitya Stiram Chaste Gatarihi Prakrito Yata Jatadarastivratapa Brahmavadi Sabhapatihi Ankikritya Stiram Chaste Gatari Prakrito Yata Jatadarastivratapa Brahmavadi Sabhapati Ankikritya Stira Chaste Gatahri Prakrito Yata Jatadarastivratapa Brahmavadi Sabhapati Ankikritya Stiram Chaste Gatahri Prakrito Yata. Jatadarastivratapa Jatadarastivratapa Brahmavadi Sabhapatihi Ankritya Stiram Chaste. Synonyms: Jatadaraha, keeping matted locks of hair. Tivratapaha, highly elevated due to undergoing fierce austerities and penances. Brahmavadi, of strict followers of the Vedic principles. Sabhapatihi, the president of an assembly. Ankikritya, embracing. Stiram, a woman. Cha, and. Aste, sits. Gatarihi, without shame. Prakritaha, a person conditioned by material nature. Yata, just as. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Śrīla Prabhupada. Lord Śiva, whose hair is matted on his head, has certainly undergone great austerities and penances. Indeed, he is the president in the assembly of strict followers of Vedic principles. Nonetheless, he is seated with his wife on his lap in the midst of saintly persons and is embracing her as if he were a shameless, ordinary human being. Purport. Citraketu appreciated the exalted position of Lord Śiva, and therefore he remarked at how wonderful it was that Lord Śiva was acting like an ordinary human being. He appreciated Lord Śiva's position, but when he saw Lord Śiva sitting in the midst of saintly persons and acting like a shameless, ordinary man, he was astonished. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura remarks that although Citraketu criticized Lord Śiva, he did not offend Lord Śiva like Dakṣa. Dakṣa considered Lord Śiva insignificant, but Citraketu expressed his wonder at Lord Śiva's being situated in that way. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurn Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapanantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaisnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaganar Agunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Sha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshware Rishabhanu Sita Devi Pranamami Hare Pre Vancha Kalpatribhyascha Kripasandibhya Evacha Patithanam Pavinebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So this section of the Bhagavatam is very significant because it shows how a devotee is interacting with another pure devotee. Lord Śiva is considered one of the best Vaishnavas. And Lord Śiva, he's not an ordinary living entity. You can say in between. He's not a conditioned soul, but he's not in the same level as Lord Vishnu. So this example of curd and milk, right? Milk can transform into curd, but curd can now go back to milk. And there was this interview where Srila Prabhupada, he was asked, who is the milk and who is the curd? And Srila Prabhupada said, Krishna is milk and Lord Śiva is curd. And the gentleman, he didn't like that. He was upset. So in Kali Yuga, Srila Prabhupada translated this age as, what is this age? So, quarrelism. Yeah. I know Solo had it, right? Yeah. It's the age of quarrelsome and hypocrisy. And this quarrelism, it describes even in between families, there's arguments. People within families. There's arguments and enemies becoming in the same family. And so when Vidura was asking Maitreya, why is there a feud between a son-in-law and the father-in-law? Lord Śiva and Dakṣa, because he mentioned it here. So Dakṣa, he wanted to perform this great sacrifice, and all the great demigods were there. Lord Śiva and Lord Brahma were also there. And when Dakṣa Maharaj, when he entered the arena or the assembly, he's described he was very effulgent. And everyone stood to give them respects, except two people, Lord Brahma and Lord Śiva. And then Lord Brahma, he asked Dakṣa to sit down. And after he sat down, before he sat down, he noticed that Lord Śiva didn't even give any attention to Dakṣa. So Dakṣa, he became angry. And he started criticizing Lord Śiva. He started mentioning how his friends were all ghosts and demons. And he hangs out in filthy places like crematoriums. And then he said that he's naked like a madman, sometimes laughing and sometimes crying. He smears crematorium ashes all over his body. He does not bathe regularly, and he ornaments his body with a garland of skulls and bones. Does anyone know what those ashes are that he smeared on his body? Hmm? Yeah, but like, who are those? Yeah, I heard they were Vaishnavas. And those skulls are the devotees. So he's not just putting any regular person's ashes or skulls around him. And so when Lord Brahma, when he gave his, on the request of Lord Brahma, he wanted to give his daughter to Lord Śiva. And Lord Śiva, he's a very simple person, right? He's a ascetic. And when Dakṣa was, you can say, asked to give his daughter to Lord Śiva, he didn't like it. And then this threw him off the cliffs, right? No respect for Dakṣa. And Dakṣa, he was puffed up because he was one of the Prajapatis to populate the universe. So anyway, and when Dakṣa left, there was a feud between the followers of Lord Śiva and Dakṣa's henchmen. And after this was going on, they were cursing each other, counting cursing, everything. And then Lord Śiva, he became very morose. He didn't say anything, and he left the arena. So this is a sign of Lord Shiva's greatness. He didn't want to participate in any of the arguments. And then Maitreya, he was telling Vidura that this went on for a very long time. And just like family parties, even if you're not invited, you still go, right? So Dakṣa, he wanted to perform another great sacrifice. And Sati, Lord Shiva's wife at that time, she saw all the airplanes and all the demigods dressed nicely, decorated with nice ornaments. So she wanted to go to her father's house. But Lord Śiva advised her it's not wise to go there. And then Lord Śiva said, yes, it's true that you can't go to a friend's house without an invitation, only if they don't have ill feelings or find fault in you. So Lord Śiva warned Sati that if you go, there's going to be a big fight. So Sati, she didn't want to follow her husband's advice, so she still went. And it's described that when she went to Dakṣa's house, there was only 2 people that welcomed her. Do you guys remember? The mother and the sisters, that's it. Everyone were so afraid of Dakṣa that they just remained quiet and they ignored her. And when Sati, when she found this out, she was very angry. So she started criticizing her own father, saying, you don't know who Lord Śiva is. Even all the demigods, they show respect to Lord Śiva. So in the end, Mother Sati, she took her own life by, it says that she matched the air in her life force with the fire in her body. So she burned herself. And then she became Parvati, right, in the next life. So, and there's this joke. How do you, if you have unwanted guests, how do you get rid of them? Don't feed them. So similarly, Dakṣa's family, they didn't want Sati to be there, so they just ignored her. And this pastime of King Citraketu, what can we learn from this pastime? There's a lot, so I'll just say a few thoughts. One of them is being critical towards Vaishnavas. And sometimes we see devotees, they may not be very ecstatic or in a happy mood, but we don't know if they had a very late day, right, on Krishna Lounge or any preaching programs, home programs. So we should always try to remember that. And maybe they had a very purifying day in Sankirtan, right? Book distributors, sometimes we experience that. There's a lot of no's, right? His name, Rajagopal Prabhu, He went with me one time to La Jolla Cove, and he was doing something I don't usually do. He was counting how many no's people were telling him, and then he was telling me, Govardhana Prabhu, that's the 90th no today, like that. So he was keeping track. So we may have had a bad day, we may have had a very purifying day in Sankirtan, or maybe we put salt instead of sugar in the halava. So then we feel kind of bad that we offer this to Krishna, to the devotees. So we shouldn't be too critical of the Vaishnavas. And the Vaishnavas, we should remember that it's very rare for one of them to surrender to Krishna. And I remember when I first started practicing Krishna consciousness, when I saw the devotees, I was so happy. They were very nice, they were welcoming, they didn't ask any questions that made me uncomfortable. So the devotees, they are real friends, the Vaishnavas. So we shouldn't criticize them. And King Citraketu, what he saw was a display of a PDA. You guys remember what that is? Public display of affection. He saw Parvati sitting on Lord Shiva's lap. In this day and age, it's very common to see that. But in that yuga, it wasn't common. I was just shooting books in La Jolla Cove, and I was talking to this couple. After they took the books, they were saying, "Oh, thank you, I want to read," and then they were kissing each other right in front of me. And I was thinking, please, you don't know that. And even when you tell them that you're a monk and you're asking for donation, sometimes they'll ask, I have this bag of weed, do you smoke it? So they give different donations, but we tell them, no, we don't do any of that. And in this day and age in Kali Yuga, you don't have to look very far, even the younger generation. Dvijamani and I, we go to Balboa Park all the time, and sometimes we see school buses. They range from elementary school to middle school. And even these middle school kids, they're holding hands now. And they're showing very sensual behavior. So this is Kali Yuga. But Citraketu, he was surprised that he saw Lord Shiva and Parvati acting in this way. And another thing we can learn from this is tolerance. Lord Shiva, he didn't say anything because he says that he understood King Citraketu's purpose. So life has ups and downs, but the question is, how do we deal with those difficulties? There are positive and negative ways to react to situations. If something is happening not the way that we want it, and we accept it, it's known as tolerance. But if we don't accept it, it becomes anger. Just like, we have plans and plans, we have expectations. And when it doesn't go our way, it leads to disappointment. And if we accept the uncertainty, it becomes an adventure. Just like becoming a devotee, right? We didn't know what we were going to get ourselves into. I always heard that devotees are going to travel all around the world. Every day is an adventure. And if we don't accept the uncertainty, it becomes fear. A lot of people, it says that the demigods, their life is characterized by enjoyment. Human life is characterized by lamentation and hankering. And then animal life is characterized by fear. So when I meet people on book distribution, they're always worrying and worrying and worrying about their bills not being paid, about their children. But Śrīla Prabhupada, he makes this point that Krishna takes care of everyone. Even the cats and dogs, they don't have religion, but Krishna is providing for them. And if we accept others' achievements and advancement, it becomes inspiration. When we see a devotee learning new instruments, when they make very nice preparations for Raj Bhog, we get inspired. But if we don't accept their achievements, it becomes envy or jealousy, right? And then something spiritual can turn mundane or material. And if someone has hurt us and we are not able to accept it, it's called hatred. But the moment we accept it, it's called forgiveness. And forgiveness is a very divine quality. Throughout our life, we can remember those that have hurt us, have said nasty things to us. But to forgive them and to forget is a very divine quality. So forgiveness is one of the things that we can learn from this. And anything that is dealt with acceptance is a positive emotion. And anything dealt with a non-accepting way is a negative emotion. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that in this material world, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. And perfect knowledge means to have a steady mind, both in success and in failure, the dualities in this world. And one of the other things we can learn from King Citraketu's pastime is that we should be very eager to go back to Godhead. I've heard devotees' classes comparing this material world as a toilet. You do your business and you get out. You don't build a tent. You don't try to find a sleeping place in the toilet. Maybe some people do. So we should be eager to go back to Krishna, go back home. I was distributing books, and this young man asked me, what is the goal of life? Why are we here? So I was explaining to him that we are thinking that this material world is our home. And I told him it's full of suffering and it's temporary. And so he appreciated the statement, and then he was asking me more questions, nice and intelligent questions. So I told him, I wish I can speak to you more, but I have a lot of books to distribute. You can take these books, read, and then you'll find the answers in them. And I said, just open a random page and you'll find your answer there. So he did that. He took a Bhagavad Gita and he turned the page. And it was talking about how the mind can become a friend or an enemy. And then he expressed how his mind is just going through so many troublesome thoughts past. And so he took the books, he gave a donation, and also gave him a contact card. I told him, if you have any questions, if you want to reach out, please don't hesitate. And another aspect we can learn from King Citraketu's pastime is that we can set examples for others. Lord Śiva, he was very tolerant, even being criticized or laughed at by King Citraketu. And so setting an example for others. In the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he says a teacher, he cannot instruct others not to smoke if he himself smokes. So the devotees, we should set good examples for others. Because Srila Prabhupada wanted us to be the leaders of society. Just like there's the head, there's the arms, there's the belly, and then there's the legs. Srila Prabhupada was explaining that now the legs is, you can say, controlling, or it's they're directing society. So the devotees were considered to be the head of society, to think clearly, to set good examples, and we want everyone to advance in Krishna consciousness. We want them to go back to Godhead, not just our own salvation, but we want others to come along with us. And another good example is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He had a mother, and he also had a young wife. But he took sannyas at that time when he was 24 years old. He had two dependents that really needed him. But he took sannyas in order to achieve a higher purpose, to spread the Sankirtan movement. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's such an example. He's such a good example for all of us. How to behave like a devotee, how to treat others as a devotee, and how to worship Krishna as a devotee. And in the Ramayana, so Lord Ramchandra, he's also a good example. When there was gossip, after he rescued Mother Sita, he asked people, he disguised himself. and he was asking the citizens, how is the kingdom? How is Lord Ram? And most of them were saying nice things. But then there was one person, and he was criticizing how Lord Ram took back Mother Sita after she's been touched by another man. And in Vedic culture, so a woman that's not married, that's been, you can say, taken by another man, they don't usually accept her. So this man, he was criticizing Lord Ram. So Lord Ram, just to set an example, what did he do? I know some devotees, they don't like this half of the Ramayana. He banished her, sent her away to the forest. And it's described at this time she was pregnant. So he did this to set an example, and also to prevent us from gossiping, right? When we gossip, we actually do harm to that devotee's advancement in spiritual life. Okay. So I was at La Jolla Cove, and I met this middle-aged lady. She said, Hare Krishna. And I said, how do you know about Hare Krishna? And then she said in LA, she was homeless for 7 years. And while she was homeless, the Hare Krishnas, they fed her every day. And they didn't judge her. So she was so happy that there was a devotee in La Jolla Cove. And then she said, I'm just going to give you a donation. And she gave $20. And I said, please take a book. And then she said, what book would you suggest? So I can tell she's still kind of going through some difficulties. So I just gave her Science of Self-Realization and Hiding in Unnatural Happiness, books that she can read. And then so she was also expressing how grateful she was that the devotees, they open up centers for others, not just for devotees, but for everyone. And when you go on book distribution, you see families a lot. And sometimes you see the family resemblance. The kids look like the dad. The daughter looks like the dad. Sometimes the dogs look like the dad. And I was distributing books in Balboa Park, and the father had a cup of coffee. The mother had a cup of coffee. And their children also had cups of coffee, like little kids. And I was thinking they're starting them in their path nicely. I told this one man, you don't need that cup of coffee. And then he said, why not? I said, coffee, it does things to your heart and to your brain. So I said, you don't need coffee. And then he was very, very hesitant. But one thing he did was he took one sip and he threw it in the trash. I said, that's good. And then I told him, you should stop smoking also. He had a cigarette in his hand, and he said, I'm not sure if I can give this up. So I told him, if I can give up marijuana, you can give up cigarettes. And then he said, okay. So he took the pack and he crushed it, and then he threw it in the trash. So I called him over, and I said, here, I have a book for you. So I gave him the set of 6 books. I said, these books, they help you to get rid of your bad habits, and you learn to have a higher taste or a better engagement. And I was having fun, so I was asking people, what is one thing that's difficult to control and sometimes gets you into trouble? I was thinking people were going to say the mind. And this man, he said, our bowels. So I started laughing with him, and I said, what's, it's probably like 40, 50 something. So I said, you're very intelligent. Let me show you one thing. So I was showing him the verse about the mind. And he said, that's true. The mind is another difficult thing to control. So I asked him, what do you do for work? And then he said, I'm into marketing. I said, oh, so you know about this, huh? And I said, what do you mean? I said, creating a need, and then you fulfill that need. And they said, yeah, that's true. So I said, I have something that you need. I gave him the Bhagavad Gita. So I was explaining to him that it's a very ancient book of knowledge. It was spoken 5,000 years ago. And it's a guidebook how to live in this world. So I was explaining to him another verse, and he liked the book so much that he bought 2 Bhagavad Gitas. He said, I want to get this for myself and then one for a friend. So he gave me a handshake, he thanked me, and then he went on his way. So the mind is very powerful, and I tell people, if we don't control the mind will control us. And there's so many times where people have stopped just when they heard that. You know, the mind is controlling me, that's true. And I was speaking to an elderly lady with her grandson. And so I was telling them about the book, Hiding in Unnatural Happiness. After I was explaining how happiness is a state of mind and it comes from within, she looked at the steps or the grandson and she asked, am I happy? Because I was telling her that we're looking for external happiness, but real happiness comes from the soul and in connection with the super soul. And then the grandson, he said, Grandma, are you having a midlife crisis? It was very cute, actually. So I gave her Hiding in Unnatural Happiness, and I said, you know, you should encourage your children to start reading. So she took the set of 6 books, and then she thanked me. She said, you know, I wanted to hear this. And I told her that encourage your children to read because knowledge is power. You don't want them to be dummies growing up. So I'll say a few other Sankirtans. There's this man that usually comes to Balboa Park, and he usually stops at my table. And he says, hey, how are you? You know? And he said, I read the book. He always says that. So one day he came to my table, and he said, I have a question for you. I said, what is it? He said, do dogs have souls? I said, everybody has a soul. And consciousness and life are symptoms of the soul. So he was telling me how his dog died yesterday. And then he said, from the Western point of view, it seems so final, right, death. So explaining to him, why are we surprised to see people die? We see our grandfather pass away, our father pass away. But when it happens to a direct family, we get so surprised. So he said, that's right. So I told him this verse, Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavaka, na chainam klida yanti apo, na shosha yati marutaha. And I told him that the soul cannot be cut into pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. So I said, you need to learn about the soul. And I asked him, do you have a Bhagavad Gita? And he said, no. So I handed him a Bhagavad Gita, and I showed him that verse. And when he was reading the purport, he said, wow, this will help a lot. Because a lot of people, they deal with grief in a very negative way. Just like when my grandmother passed away at the funeral home. I gathered enough courage to say something about the soul, and I read from Bhagavad Gita. And my mom, she was surprised. She was surprised that I was reading something from our scriptures, because my mom, she's not so favorable that I became a devotee. But all my other relatives, after the ceremony, they came to me and they said, thank you for reading that. We needed to hear about the soul. So the Bhagavad Gita, it's attractive to everyone, to anyone, as long as they open it. And then I met this other lady. She said, I really need peace of mind. My husband passed away. Death is so painful for others, but they don't know that the soul continues. And according to our desire, the time of death, it carries us to our next body. And there was this, you can say, big, muscular young man. I called him over to the table. And I asked him, how do you measure one's strength? You know, and he was telling me bench pressing, deadlift, you know, physical strength. So I told him, you measure it by how much you can tolerate. And then he said, I never thought of that. And I said, when your day's going not the way you wanted to, how do you deal with it? And he said, I get very angry. So I told him, you're weak-minded. And that caught his attention. And I told him, you may have a very big body, but your mind is is very prone to being agitated easily. So I was sharing him the books, the wisdom in the Bhagavad Gita, and he asked me, how much for this book? And I used Vijay's line, you can't put a price on wisdom. He said, give me a price, give me a price. He was so eager to get the book. So I said, most people give between $10 and $20. He said, if I give you 30, can I get this book and another book? I said, of course. So he took 2 Bhagavad Gitas and a set of 6 books. And I said, who are you going to give these to? I said, I'm going to give them to all my gym bros. The people that he goes to the gym with. And they said, thank you for being here. So the devotees, when we go out on Sankirtan, even on Harinam, people feel inspired by seeing the devotees, how cheerful and how happy we are. And I'll end with this. You know, in the Pujari room, those that have been in the back, Dainiri Prabhu, he says a lot of interesting things. So he's mentioning how the younger Indian devotees, they're looking for true love, right? Looking for true love. So I told him, Dainiri, maybe I should look for true love. I was kidding. And then he said, Prabhu, you know how he sounded. And then he said, Krishna is the only true love. And I appreciated that statement. So we should be eager to go back to Godhead. We should tolerate even the offenses towards us. And then we should inspire people to want to learn more about Krishna. Because Krishna is our best friend, but we've forgotten about him. And the Bhagavad Gita is a nice way to remember Krishna, to see him in this life and in the next. Okay? Are there any questions, comments, chastisement? So, you have a question?
Is that a yes?
Yes, Dvijamani.
I have a question. Thank you for a nice class. How can you develop tolerance?
Well, that famous saying in the Shikshastikam, we should be tolerant than a tree and humble as a blade of grass. And like that story that Maharaj always tells, you know, maybe I offended him in a previous life. So we should always remember that, who are we, you know? And maybe I've done something very bad to this other person. And tolerance is a very nice quality, actually. But sometimes when the sax man is in Balboa Park, Vijay can't tolerate him. So we can develop tolerance also by understanding that we're all conditioned souls. And we should strive to, you can say, better people's lives by not giving them any trouble also. That's the best I can do.
We were hearing yesterday from Dharma Setu Prabhu, and he asked me to find that verse about the Avanti Brahman, you know. And the verse described his attitude, you know, for all that happened to him, because he had everything taken away and everything. And he came, you know, the conclusion that this was a great mercy of Krishna. In other words, the tolerance when you see when things bad happen to you, that famous verse, Tattenu Kampam Susamikshamano, to see that this is actually Krishna's mercy, because he's making me, you know, less attached as something I did in the past life. Somehow see it as not a something that you have to, you know, counteract or get angry about, but actually a devotee sees it. Oh, this is Krishna's helping me to become more surrendered, you know. And in that way, you always maintain your positive attitude. That's actually the most mature way of dealing with difficulties, because it becomes, you say, oh, you know. And I think many devotees, and I myself included, can see how difficulties in our life stimulated us to join the Hare Krishna movement. You know, because this was just seeing the devotees, how they were so austere, and that they were able to, you know, they were still very joyful, and that Krishna consciousness helps you to to tolerate difficulties and even to see the benefit, making it more, And there's many lessons like that in the Gita and all of our shastras. The greatest devotees, they undergo these great austerities, but they don't become resentful, they don't become angry at God, they don't, rather they see it, oh, Krishna's taking away my attachments.
And they become more surrendered also. So?
Just 2 seconds. Trinad apisunachan, what it says is one should be more humble than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree. It's quite a standard. The trees are so tolerant, but you have to be more tolerant than a tree. Yes.
Bhakta Saul?
I had two questions. One is, you were talking about this idea of death, and people are surprised. Will we ever be ready? Would it always be a surprise, even the amount of time we prepare for it? That's a question you could say. Will we ever be ready for death, no matter what? Will we always be surprised?
Well, the process of Krishna consciousness is that readiness, Because Srila Prabhupada, he always makes the point that it can be our last day today, right now. And I remember His Holiness Giriraj Swami Maharaj, he gave a class and he says, life's final exam is death, Are we prepared for it? Are we preparing for it even, A lot of people, they want to wait till death comes, and I told them that's not very intelligent, What if there is karma? What if there is reincarnation? And then you're going to have a lot to explain. But, this Kali Yuga, they're very not so smart. They're lazy, quarrelsome, and agitated.
I was thinking when you said that, because even devotees were so kind of, shocked. Not shocked, but still impacted when Prabhupada left. And so, somebody who was, you could say, controlled. Yeah. My second question was, these demigods and whatnot, they must, they're huge and they must look down on us like little ants. But, and their position is so temporary. Is their soul still the same, like it says in the Bhagavad Gita, it's just a tip of a hair? Is that the same thing with the demigods as well?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
From what I understand, the measurement of the soul is the same, it's just the bodies are different. Like the same soul, a tiny particle, is even in the same big body as an elephant, Even an ant, it's just different bodies. So the measurement is the same. And I remember what you said earlier, death, it can happen anytime. So we should really, really strive to make this our last life. If not, then, next life we'll be born in a devotee family. We'll have better facilities to continue where we left off. And we've heard great devotees also leaving their body unfazed. Like Shamli Mataji. All these devotees that were chanting around her. Her spiritual master was even on the phone with her. And His Grace Rajendra Nandana Prabhu also. He was one of those prime examples that, faced death dead on. Yeah. Did you ever meet Rajendra? Oh, yeah. Okay. Did that answer a little bit? Okay.
Anyone? I want something if there's time.
Yes, Maitreya Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you for a wonderful class. I just wanted to appreciate your Sankirtan stories. You're like a transcendental doctor, and your patient, especially like the one of that homeless lady who said that devotees were kind to her, and you gave her books which you knew she would be able to digest and appreciate right away. And I don't know if you know that the science of self-realization is famous as a devotee maker. Mm-hmm. It's very assimilable. Like we read yesterday, Dravida Prabhu was reading from the pastime of Lieutenant Mosey and Śrīla Prabhupada talking about crime in Chicago. So many very approachable stories like that. It's a really wonderful introductory book. Anyway, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maitreya. The reason why I like to distribute this book is because it's the first book that I read. and it convinced me 100%, you know, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is life after this, and then there is a purpose for human life. And Bhakta Chris, he was here. You guys remember Bhakta Chris? I went on book distribution with him and asked him, what book do you like to distribute? And he said, Higher Taste, because that was his first book, you know. So Higher Taste is also a wonderful book to introduce him to prasadam, to offering bhoga to Krishna. And then to live I like in the front of the book, it says karma-free diet. So then they get the idea of karma and how painful killing an animal is, and how much bad how bad it is. Okay. Yes, Dravida Prabhu.
It's nice to remember how these books came about. We rarely see Bhakti Godhead anymore, but at one point Prabhupada said Bhakti Godhead is the backbone of this movement. Mm-hmm. And he specifically arranged that so that the devotees would write most of the articles, because they could speak to the people at large. In other words, they could word things in such a way that people would be more likely to understand sometimes. But the article, always in Bhakti Godhead, because I worked in Bhakti Godhead for 5 or 6 years, was the features for Srila Prabhupada's article at the beginning, often a lecture, or in the case we're reading Lieutenant Mosey, the conversation, you know. But they were picked out carefully for that reason, that devotees that the people at large could understand them. And so, if you go through the Science of Self-Realization, that's what mostly it is: selection of articles of Prabhupada's from Bhakti Godhead that he did. And so, Prabhupada was always aware of that. He knew that Bhagavad Gita is great, and it's very potent, and you should study it. But it's also fairly difficult for newcomers. If they can read it, they'll a good chance to become devotees if they get through it. But this thing with Lieutenant Mosey, I happened to work on that article myself. Prabhupada was reading an article in Time magazine on a plane, crime, why, and what to do. Then he flies into Chicago, which is the subject of that article. And so he was very eager to meet the opportunity to meet that Lieutenant Mosey's position in the police, or maybe he was part of the government. And so those kind of things really intrigue people. I remember we had one article in there about cocaine karma, and and back to Godhead, or. There was one, all kinds of things, and they're put in specific way to intrigue people because they're current events, But then there's always a Krishna conscious view of it, So that's why that book, because and we should appreciate Jaya Vaidya. He chose all the articles. He also worked on many of the articles, and organizes in such a way that it would be very relatable to people. So it's a classic.
Thank you, Dravida Prabhu. Grand Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai.